On November 10, 1955, a merchant vessel spotted a ghost ship drifting far off course in the South Pacific. It was the MV Joita. The ship was leaning heavy to one side, half full of water, but it was still floating above the deep blue ocean. No movement could be seen on the deck. The vessel was riding the ocean swells like a silent wooden log with no human hand at the wheel. The ship had left Samoa 5 weeks earlier on a short 2-day voyage across open water. On board were 25 missing passengers and crew members who were traveling to nearby islands. When rescuers finally climbed up the wet deck, they found the ship totally empty. Every single person on board had vanished without leaving a note, a sign of struggle, or a clear answer behind. Official inquiry records from late 1955 revealed an extraordinary physical fact about the boat. The ship was packed tightly with thick cork lining. These cork-filled cargo holds made the ship almost impossible to sink, no matter how much water poured inside. Investigators immediately asked a chilling question. Why would 25 people abandon a ship that was physically incapable of sinking to the bottom of the sea? Inside the flooded cabin, searchers found another disturbing piece of evidence. The ship was equipped with a proper emergency radio distress set designed to broadcast calls across great distances. However, a close inspection showed that the main power line to the radio had been deliberately severed. Without that vital connection, the emergency radio distress setup was completely useless, leaving the crew unable to call for help. Maritime reports noted that the break in the radio wire was sharp and clean. It was not snapped by sudden tension or worn down by rough weather over time. Someone on board had physically cut the wire before the vessel was abandoned. This calculated act effectively isolated the ship from the rest of the world, preventing any distress message from reaching nearby rescue stations on neighboring islands. 5 weeks prior, in October 1955, the Joyita had pulled away from the busy harbor of Apia in Samoa. The weather was clear as the vessel set out toward the Tokelau Islands. On board were government officials, a doctor, island residents, and experienced crew members. They carried medical supplies, timber, and food to help small communities that relied entirely on visiting supply ships for survival. The planned sea route was straightforward and usually took less than 48 hours to complete. Captain Thomas Miller was a seasoned sailor who knew the dangerous currents of the South Pacific well. He had spent years navigating these remote waterways. The ship carried proper survival equipment, including auxiliary boats and inflatable rubber rafts, giving those on board every reason to believe the journey would be simple and safe. Beneath the wooden deck boards lay 4 tons of valuable timber alongside medical cargo. Combined with the buoyant cork-filled holds, this wooden cargo provided immense lifting force in the water. Even when heavy waves washed over the deck, the vessel possessed natural buoyancy that kept it floating like a giant cork. The physical laws of flotation proved the ship was safer than any small life raft. When the ship failed to arrive at its destination on time, search operations began immediately across the South Pacific. Planes from the Royal New Zealand Air Force swept over
thousands of square miles of open ocean. Pilots searched day after day for any sign of smoke, flare, or floating debris. Despite clear skies and calm water, searchers found absolutely nothing across the vast blue expanse for over a month. When the merchant ship Tuvalu finally spotted the drifting Joyita, the vessel was floating more than 600 miles off her intended path. Water filled the lower compartments, causing the deck to tilt sharply to port. Ocean waves washed over the stern, but the structural hull remained intact. The ghost ship had survived weeks of wind and wave action without sinking an inch lower into the sea. Boarding officers stepped onto the damp wood and recorded details in their forensic logs. The electric clocks on board were all stopped at exactly 10:20. The vessel was completely clear of its 4 canvas life rafts, as well as essential survival gear and primary medical kits. Yet despite extensive searches across surrounding ocean waters, no human bodies or life raft remains were ever found anywhere nearby. Down in the doctor's cabin, investigators discovered a deeply unsettling scene. A small medical bag lay open on a table, surrounded by bloody bandages and used medical tools. This physical clue strongly suggested that at least one person on board had suffered a serious injury before the ship was abandoned. Whatever happened inside that small room appeared to have triggered panic among those stranded on the boat.
Deep inside the dark engine room, inspectors uncovered technical problems with the ship's machinery. The main engine clutch was disengaged, meaning the vessel could no longer move under its own power. An auxiliary cooling pump had broken a pipe, allowing seawater to leak into the bilge compartments at a steady pace. Water had slowly risen until it touched the electrical generators, shutting down all power on board. The mechanical bilge pumps were correctly positioned to clear water from the hold, but they were blocked by loose debris. Wood chips and dirt had clogged the suction pipes, preventing the pumps from working when water began to rise. As seawater filled one side of the vessel, the weight caused the ship to list heavily, creating the terrifying illusion that the ship was about to capsize and sink. A formal court of inquiry convened in Fiji to examine every scrap of evidence from the recovered hull. Naval experts reviewed mechanics, radio equipment, and weather patterns from October 1955. They questioned witnesses who knew the captain and crew, attempting to reconstruct the final hours on board. The inquiry aimed to understand why a trained captain would order his crew into the dangerous open sea on small rafts. Naval experts theorized that the crew may have panicked when water covered the deck during the dark night. If the captain believed the hull was breaking apart, he might have ordered everyone into the life rafts for safety. Unaware that the cork-filled cargo holds guaranteed the vessel would remain afloat indefinitely, the missing passengers and crew likely cast off into the dark ocean, leaving their safest shelter behind. Leaving a heavy floating ship for small inflatable rafts in the middle of the ocean was a fatal decision. Small rubber rafts offered little protection against strong waves, sharp reef rocks, and predatory sea life. Once the rafts drifted away from the buoyant vessel, the passengers were exposed to high winds and heavy swells. Without a working radio to send coordinates, rescue ships had no way to find them. The cut emergency radio cable remained the most baffling piece of evidence in the case file. If someone deliberately severed the wire, it suggested a sinister element present on board before the abandonment.
Investigators considered whether an argument or sabotage had taken place during the trip. Without a working emergency radio distress connection, the crew was cut off from immediate rescue, leaving them isolated in the middle of the ocean. Investigators also explored theories of pirate attacks or foreign military interference in the region. However, valuable property remained untouched inside the cabins and holds. Thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, tools, and personal belongings were left on board when the ship was found. The lack of missing cargo made traditional robbery unlikely, turning the focus back toward internal mechanical failure and extreme human panic under pressure. Across the isolated villages of the Tokelau Islands, the human cost of the tragedy was devastating. 25 families waited in vain for loved ones who never stepped ashore. Doctors, school inspectors, and experienced sailors vanished together in a single night. The loss deeply affected small island communities that depended on these individuals for leadership, care, and basic supplies, leaving deep emotional scars that lasted for generations. Modern forensic reevaluations of the maritime logs confirm the original findings of the Court of Inquiry. The physical construction of the Joyita meant that even completely flooded, the boat had positive buoyancy. Structural tests showed the hull could easily support the weight of 25 people while floating high enough to keep them safe. The ship was truly a floating sanctuary that was abandoned by mistake. Weather records from October 1955 show that sea conditions along the route were moderate. There were no tropical storms or massive waves reported near the ship's path during those days. A well-constructed vessel like the Joyita should have managed the ocean swells without difficulty. The physical damage found on the ship was caused by standing water and age rather than catastrophic storm damage at sea. Despite decades of searching beaches, small islands, and ocean lanes across the South Pacific, no trace of the 25 missing passengers has ever been recovered. No marked life jackets, message bottles, or broken raft materials ever washed ashore on nearby islands. The vast ocean absorbed every piece of evidence, leaving behind only the ghost vessel itself to tell a partial story of what happened that night. After the investigation ended, the Joyita was sold, repaired, and put back into service as a trading vessel. However, sailors viewed the ship with deep fear, calling her cursed and unlucky. She ran aground twice in later years, suffering heavy hull damage each time.
Eventually, the once sturdy boat was stripped of its valuable parts and left to break apart on a quiet beach far from the deep sea. Today, police archives and maritime history records keep the case open as one of the most mysterious disappearances of the 20th century. Forensic experts still study the mechanical logs, the severed wire, and the clogged pumps to understand the sequence of events. Nearly 70 years after the disaster, the full truth about why 25 people vanished from an unsinkable ship remains locked away in marine mystery. The empty vessel survived the heavy waves, but its human story ended in total silence across the ocean. The cut radio wire, the open doctor bag, and the empty cork-filled holds remain frozen in time as silent witnesses to a dark night. The MV Joita stays floating in history as a haunting reminder of how fear and chance can turn a safe journey into an unsolved tragedy.